All right, let's pick up where we left off, and we're going to start styling anchor links and adjusting padding and margins and discussing box model issues. So last thing we did is we messed around with the gradient of this background, and if you can remember, we sort of went back and forth trying different things. And you know, as I look at this, I sort of think maybe it is too light, and maybe I did like the other one that I had before. Um, I could simply just go and undo it just by, you know, going into my edit and then undo. But if you can't do that, maybe you've closed it and you just can't go back and undo it. One of the things that I think I'd like to do is I'm going to click on this, and I wanted to show you how you can always go back to edit it later. I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it, and then if I go into my CSS gradient, it's right here, but if I wanted to click this just like that and enter, it will take me back to the exact gradient that I was using. And so I think what I decided is that I actually think that I like this all the way out here, and I want to get rid of this middle one. I think that I do like it, in fact, uh, closer to the top, if not at the very top, closer to the top. All right, and so, you know, maybe not quite as far down as it was before. And so I'm going to put it about right there and do a select all. Oops, not there. I'm going to select all of this, copy it again, and come back here and we'll replace it. And part of why I'm showing you this is also so that you know how to change that later if you want to. So I think that this might actually give some better contrast, and yeah, let's just keep it at that. All right, so moving forward, let's figure out how to style this link down at the bottom because it's really hard to see. You may have been wondering all of this time, like, why, you know, hasn't the text color for that anchor link changed? Because if you take a look at it, here, let's open this up a little bit more. If you take a look at it, you'll see that it's down here. It's not actually in a paragraph. It is in the article. So even if it were inside of this paragraph, it would still look the same. You might be thinking, well, why wouldn't it take the paragraph color? In fact, if I just cut this really quick and I put it up here inside the paragraph, I want to show you that it actually still is the same color. It didn't take on this lighter, almost white color that the paragraph did. I'm going to undo that in my HTML. And the reason that it didn't take that color is because anchor links are different. Anchor links will not follow inherited properties. They, as a, you know, like most text will inherit the properties of its parents if text has been told to be a certain way. And so anchor links are not like that, though. They will not follow inherited properties. They are special because they are hyperlinks. And so you have to style them specifically. And let's go down here and let's go ahead and down below this image, let's put something for the anchor link. So I'm going to make an A tag selector, right, like this. And it's the only link that we have in here, so I could get away with just doing this single A tag. If we had other links in here, then we would have to maybe be more specific and give the A tag an ID so that we could target it, sort of like we did with the callout ID. And so, but this regular anchor link is the only one in the page, so we'll just make that into something that looks like a button. So if we want to, first of all, let's change the color right off the bat. That's the first thing that we're going to do because I really can't stand that blue color. In fact, if you leave any of your links this bright blue color, you will probably lose points because I will think that you left it unstyled. So if I say color, let's just try white for right now. Let's just so that we can see it. And you can see that it shows up as white down here. The other thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of that underlined. And the way to do that is you want to target something called text-decoration. And that is where the underline is coming from. And so you want to say text decoration is none, and it gets rid of the underline. Oops. there we go, Terminator. And you see that the underline is gone. Well, now it doesn't really look like a text link. It just looks like regular old text. So let's do something else. Let's make it look like a button. Let's give it a background color. All right, and so far, whenever I've talked about background color, we've talked about using this, all right, and that's fine if you want to keep it like that. The other thing that you could do is you could use a shorthand, which is just background. We haven't really talked about that, but background is shorthand and it'll accept lots of different properties, including color, the URL, the background position, background attachment, and so on, background repeat. But let's just do regular background, and let's start by giving it some sort of color. In fact, let's give it the same color as this text up here maybe. Let's go and find that color. I think it's this for this call out. I'll copy that. And we're going to give it that color for the background. All right, well, now the color for the text you'll see down here is too bright. So let's do something where we find a darker color of blue. Let's go to assets and maybe find, let's see what this color is. That looks like it might be a good color to use. All right, so we'll come here and replace white with that. And that looks like a better color because it sort of almost looks like you can see through the background. All right, so we're getting closer. Now it needs to be more dominant in terms of scale. So we want to give it padding. Now this is where we can start talking about box model. Margins, if you remember from the lecture, margins are outside of the border. So if you talk about the element, when we're looking at just the element itself, the element would just be the text. And right now you can see that because the element is just text and it's an inline element, an anchor link is an inline element, it only takes up as much room as is necessary. And the background color, when you assign it, is just going to cinch right up against the element, okay? The next thing that if you wanted to give it more space, you would give it what's called padding. Padding is going to always be inside of the element, but I like to think of it as sort of like if I ate a lot of cookies, right? Then I would become more padded. I would physically take up a little bit more space, right? And so in terms of you, like if you want to think of the element as like my internal organs, right? If I ate a lot of cookies and cakes and stuff, right, I would have more padding around those organs. So if we say padding like this, then my hypothesis right now is that the orange space is going to grow. So let's say that the padding is like 1em, for instance. Okay, and then the button just got a lot bigger, and I'm going to terminate that. I don't know that I want the button to be quite that big. Let's try like maybe 0.75em. You can do decimals for ems. That might be a better size. But 1em is okay if that's what you like. The other thing too is that I think I want the text to be heavier. So if I want that to have a different weight, then I'm going to say font weight like that. And then we can say bold, for instance. And it will work if I just say bold because we have loaded, if you look up in here, and it's, remember this is just Open Sans, we have this Open Sans 700. 700 is the equivalent of bold for that typeface. The other thing that I could have done is instead of bold, I could have typed 700 and it would basically be the same thing. All right. So either way, you could, if you know the number that is for bold and you have it loaded, that's fine. You can type it. Otherwise, you can just simply type bold. All right. So that's the font weight. Now, I think I'd also kind of like to give it sort of more of a button feel. So like maybe round the corners of this a little bit. So I can say border radius, and we're going to give each corner a border radius of, let's maybe try like 8 pixels or something like that and see if that's acceptable. That might be a little bit heavy. Let's try like maybe 6 pixels, and that's a little bit better. I might even go down to like 4 or 5 pixels or something like that. Let's try 5. Okay, and so that's got now a border radius, and then if we want to add like maybe a white border around it, we could do that. So It's called border is the name of that property. And I'm not going to give it, you notice that when I started to type border, it popped up with all these different options. We could do like border left, border right, border top, or shorthand for border is just border. And then if we apply, there are 3 positions and it doesn't matter what order you put them in, what the thickness is. And so in this case, let's try maybe 2 pixels for the thickness of the border. And then you want to give the color. Or you can tell it what type. And the type is going to be solid, dotted, dashed. So like let's say we wanted to try dotted, right? And it'll start to show up. And then if we add the color, let's say that we want it to be white, okay? That would be the way that dotted would look. And if you made it like, let's say instead of 2 pixels, let's say 10 pixels, it would look crazy like that, right? There's dotted, there's also dashed, there's some other ones too. All right, but the one I'm going to use is solid. All right, and it's not going to be 10 pixels. Let's go back to say 2 pixels. All right, and that looks okay. The other thing too that we could do is we can give it a shadow around it so that it kind of stands out like everything else kind of does. So let's do, instead of text shadow, it won't be text shadow. We don't want it just around the text, we want it around the entire element, and that would be called the box shadow. And a box shadow, if you think about this concept of each element being sort of like a box model, right, then you could think of this as a box shadow. All right, and so we can say let's try doing like a 2 pixel offset for the left and right, because that's what we used before, so we'll be consistent, and also the same is true for the top and bottom. And then we're not going to do a huge blur like the way that we did before. Let's maybe do like a 6 pixel spread. And then let's also give it a color. Let's do an RGBA again, and let's say that it's going to be black so that it's easy to see, and then we can do like 0.5 or something like that. And it's not really showing up. I forgot that there's one other thing that to tell you. So this is like for a text shadow, we've got the horizontal offset, we've got the vertical offset, and then there's the blur. And the other thing that we need to do is add the spread, and that's going to be the 4th position here. So let's do like 2 pixels or something like that, and then we should start to see it a little bit more. It might be kind of hard to see right here. If we increase the opacity to 1, it becomes a little bit darker and it stands out more. I don't really like that being that dark. So let's knock it back down again. I don't know, maybe 50% is too light, but let's try like maybe 60%. And you start to see it a little bit more. I actually do like 50%, I think. And you could make the spread even bigger if you, or not the spread, the blur even bigger, so that it stands out more, and maybe make the spread a little bit smaller. And so it pops a little bit more, and so you could do something like that. The other thing is you'll notice that this anchor is just sitting cinched right up to the bottom of that paragraph. I want to give it a little more space. The anchor tag currently is an inline element. That's natively its behavior. But there's another way that you can trick the browser into thinking it's something different, and that's using the property called display, and it's a display type. And if we wanted to, for instance, pretend to make it a block level element, we could say block, and it takes up the entire block. We don't want that, but the thing that I do want it to do is I want it to behave similarly to a block level element in that it drops down to the next line, but I don't want it to physically and visually take up the entire block. So what we can do is there's this thing called inline dash block, and it's sort of like the best of both worlds in that it drops down to the next block, but it stays looking like an inline element, and it only takes up as much room as is necessary. Okay, and so that's how that can work like that, right? And I think that that's okay, the way that that's working out. And the other thing too that I can then do, if you hover over it, you know, it doesn't give me any kind of visual indicator that it's hovering to make a change. Like most clickable links, you expect there to be some sort of interactive cue. Well, you can do that if you come down and create a new rule, it's going to be what's referred to as a pseudo selector. And a pseudo selector means that there's going to be the selector name with the colon and then no spaces. You can't have any spaces here. And then you put the state that you want it to affect. In this case, we're going to do a hover state. So any instance of hovering on top of the A tag will result in this particular CSS change. And what I want to do is maybe make the background a different color. Let's maybe make it more saturated. So what's going to happen is if I have to make sure to use the exact same uh, property name that I did up here, and what it'll do is it'll override it because now it's coming after this anchor in the CSS. It comes afterwards. So let's say that we're going to have a background color. Let's go find something that's like a heavier orange. Let's try this one right there and come back over here and paste it. And let's actually close that. And if we hover it, that looks great. It's subtle, but it's not, it's obvious. All right, I can see the change. It gets my attention. And if you wanted, you could also change the color of the text too. And that would actually help make the change a little less subtle, but without being too strong. So we'll change the color, and this will override the previous color, which was set up here in the A, which is that dark navy blue. Maybe we can make it like a dark gray. And if we want to do that, we can use the color picker. The other thing I can tell you is if you do a hashtag and then you type like the number 333, that's going to be kind of a dark charcoal, and you can see how that changes, and that makes it a little bit more obvious. This is sort of a dark charcoal color. If you think about it, 000, which is RGB, right? 0 levels of red, 0 levels of green, 0 levels of blue. If you think about it, if you were to type 111, that's just barely up from there, so that's almost black. 222 is a little lighter, right? And then 333 is yet again, right? And it goes on up. All right, and so you can see that that's a little bit more gray. It's sort of a charcoal color. But that's one way of finding something that's sort of like a gray that is sort of a dark color. Anyway, and normally these hexadecimal numbers, they're called hex numbers because there are 6. Hex means 6. So, but this is only 3. Well, that's because it's a shorthand version of the number. Any number that has all the same number, like 333, 333, actually can be shortened to be just 333. Okay, so that is just a little quick tip. All right, so let's go ahead and make sure that we've saved this. We haven't saved it for a little bit. And we're in a pretty good place in terms of what we've got so far. The one thing that you still need to do is you need to get all of these margins looking better. Like right now, our proportions are not great. All of the text and the imagery, they're sort of slammed right up against the edges, and that doesn't look so good. So let's talk a little bit about how you can adjust this for the box model in a way that is going to work a little bit better. So there's some different approaches that you could take. If you go back to thinking about the box model, all right, anything that is, that you want to give padding to, what that means is it's going to be inside of that element. So let's say that we wanted padding all the way around the entire document. Well, we could start by going to the body, because the body is going to be in terms of what the viewport sees, right? I don't want to give it to the HTML. I don't want to do that. I want to just go ahead and put it on the body. And so if we've got the body right here, I can come down anywhere. Maybe I'll put it after the margin, and we can just do padding. And again, we've got padding right, padding left, padding right, top, padding bottom, but I'm just going to do the shorthand of padding. And if I wanted to apply padding uniformly all the way around, then I could do it in a single number. I could either do it in percentages, I could do it in pixels, I could do it in ems, I could do it in viewport width or viewport height. But what I'm going to do right now is I want to think about it being kind of like in a percentage, because I want it to scale the padding based on how big somebody's got their browser. And so if I do it in a percentage, it's going to be based on the width of the browser. Let's see what 5% looks like. I'll type that and terminate it. And already that looks better. Just already that gives me a lot more confidence in the way that this looks. All right, and so I don't know that I necessarily want the be good to yourself to start that low. I'm not sure that I care about that being that low. So let's see what happens if we change that. So the way that the padding works, and this is going to be true for margin as well, in shorthand, is that you have the potentially up to 4 positions, and it goes like in a clockwise order. So you would start with top, like at the 12 o'clock position on the clock. You could say that you wanted 0 padding on the top, and what that just did, just so you know, it also does have 2 positions. So if I put 0 and then I put 5%, it reads the first position as both top and bottom. It groups those together, right? And so now I have no padding on the bottom, which I don't think I like, and I have no padding on the top, which I also don't think I care for too much. And on the left and right, we have 5%. So I actually think that I like having it 5% all the way around, but just for illustrative purposes, let me show you another thing that you could do. Like, so we could start with the top, and then it would go to the right. And then if we wanted to do something different from the bottom, we could say another 5% on the bottom, and then 0 on the left, right? Something like that. I don't like that, but we could also do 5% on the left, and then we have 0 at the top. Again, like I said, I don't care for that. So let's just go back to having 5% all the way around. I think that that looks okay. All right. The next thing that I want to look at is I don't know that I care for this image being so close to the text on the right side. So there's some different ways that you could adjust that. And the quickest way is to find that image rule, because we have a rule that is specific to that IMG tag, and I want to add padding to the IMG. All right, and so if I go over here and I say padding, let's just see what it looks like if we add something all the way around. And I don't want to do this in percentages. I actually want to do this like in ems, because it's right next to text and the text is based in ems. So let's try like maybe 1em for padding, and you can see that it bumps it away. Now I don't like what it did to the top. I don't think that I want that extra padding at the top of the image, and I don't know if I necessarily want it to be that far away off of the left either. So what I can do is, like I said before, I can do it in a clockwise fashion where I say, 0 for the top, and then for the right I can say 1em, and then for the bottom I can say 0 again, and for the left I can say 0. All right, and so what that is doing is it's saying top, no padding, right gets 1em, the bottom gets 0, right, and the left gets 0. So the image ends up being flush left with this be good to yourself text. Okay, you could also see what like 1.5em looks like, and it bumps it away a little bit further. That might be nice, right, to have it there. So that's another option. The other thing too is that I'm not 100% sure that I like it this far away from the be good to yourself. It might be fine there. I don't know, but we could explore making it collapse a little bit. So let's take a look over here at our call out. Our call out for the margin, we have the margin top set to 0, but we don't deal with any other margins. Well, I can guarantee that because this is a block level element, it's a paragraph, it has a bottom margin, and that's part of what's giving us this extra space here. So if you wanted, you could actually go and let's just, instead of saying margin top, let's see what if we just say margin does, and it pulls it up closer here. All right, and so that gives us a little bit more proximity. And so if we leave margin at 0, maybe now what I actually want to do is go down to the image and give it a little bit of padding at the top. Maybe we'll give it something like 0.5 m on the top, and it bumps it down just a little bit. And so you could start to make a decision, like maybe you want it to be 1 m, right? And it comes down a little bit further. And it's not as far back as it was before. Like it was quite a bit further. It was something like, I want to say 1.5 or 2 m down. It was significantly more. And so you could have that padding right there in such a way that it ends up working to separate it, but also to make it a little bit closer. All right. So, and the margin is not inside. Like padding is going to be on the inside of the element. And then there's the border that sort of contains it, like you see down here with this link. Margin is like personal space. Like if you're standing next to a person and they get too close to you, you want to push them away. That would create visual distance between the two of you. So if an element has a background color, the margin does not include that background color because it's still considered part of the element space, but it doesn't actually show any of the color of the element or background image or anything like that. And so, you know, that puts us in a pretty good place. The other thing that I want to do before I call this good and done is I want to go ahead and let's open this, let's open this in a new window, and let's make sure that it still looks good whenever we scale it and when we do something like this. And one of the things that I'm looking for is to see what happens with the way that the text stacks whenever it wraps, because sometimes your line height can get messed up. We didn't specify line height anywhere. In traditional graphic design, that's also called leading. And so if you want to open up the leading or the line height, I don't know that we need to necessarily, but if you wanted to explore a little bit with that, you can come over here and let's just make it so that we can see it all in the same window. Let's go back to change view and add it back again. Okay. All right. So let's get out of that. All right. If I want to adjust the line height, I can either do it up on the body. That's one option that I can do, or I can do it on individual elements, which might be a better idea. So let's go down where I think we had something called article P. Yeah, article P. And let's see what happens if we adjust the line height just for this paragraph text. And we can say line dash height, and we can give it, if it's currently set to be 16 pixels or 1 m as the base size, then what we can do is try opening it up. We're going to give it more than 1 m. So if we do like 1.5 m, like this, you can see that it opens it up a little bit. And you may like that, you may not like that. It really just depends on your preference. I kind of think that the line height and the spacing between these things, these two headings, it's a little bit far apart. I think that that should be a little bit closer. And so that's where we want to adjust some of the margins actually, now that I start looking at this more closely. So I could come over here to this H1, because remember Sierra Quest GX3, that is the H1. So I can come over here to that rule, and I think that I'm going to get rid of this text transform uppercase. I think I like it not uppercase. I don't know. Actually, maybe I will. Let's just leave it there for a minute. And let's go ahead and make sure that its margins are collapsed as well. So we can say margin, and let's just see what happens if we just do 0 all the way around. And you see it pulls it up. I don't know that I necessarily want it to go all the way up there. You could, if you wanted to see how that looks. You may end up liking that better. I think that I might like it a little bit lower. I'm not sure that I want that there. So let's say, let's do margin dash bottom. Okay, and you might think, well, wait, that didn't actually fully collapse it. Well, that's also because this H2 has a top margin, remember? All right, so if we go to the H2 and we say margin, Let's just see what happens if we say margin 0, right? And it collapses it, and it pulls it up closer to the H1, and we're okay with it on the bottom because this paragraph also still has a top margin. So that might actually be a little bit better. And it's a little close. So it's really up to you how you want to adjust this. I think that it might be a little bit better this way so that these two things have more similarity and better grouping. And you might even look at that H2 then and go, well, you know, maybe it could be a little bit smaller. You could play with it and see if you want that H2 to be a different size. And if we look at how big the H1 is, it's 2M. All right, so it needs to be smaller than that. I think it's a little bit too big right now. So we can say font size for the H2. And let's do something like 1.15M and see how that looks. And that gets a little bit too small for my liking. So let's try something like let's say 2.5. And that's a little bit better. You could even see and split the difference and say, okay, what does that look like? It's a little bit smaller. And I think maybe 2.5 is okay. Well, maybe I do like the smaller one. We could do 2.5, all right? And see how that looks whenever we scale it around, right? Yeah, and I think that that's a better proportion, probably. Now that I've done that, though, one of the things that I realize is that I think that the line height for this paragraph text is a little bit too open. I think that it's confusing because it starts to be very similar to the line height that's up above in the headings. And so I think that that might be a little bit too open. So I'm going to go where I changed it in article P. I have that line height, and let's just see what happens if we say 1.15M. All right, it's a little bit too tight. Okay, so what if we do 2.5? And you can start to mess around with this and make some adjustments. So let's see what 1.3 looks like, and it's not that much different. Okay, and 1.4 might be a little bit better, but you can see the difference between that and say 1.5, and it really does make a huge difference in terms of the way that the grouping is. All right, and so I'm going to leave that at that article P line height at 1.4M, and I think that that's probably pretty good. If you want to double check one more time, we can open it up in a new window and play around with the different sizing. It looks pretty good like that, right? And it sort of cascades down pretty well, and it's still pretty reasonable. And you know, there's some things like I wouldn't really want this to go under there. We're not going to go over that just yet. For right now, this is totally fine. All right, for what you're learning at the moment, this is totally fine. And you've actually learned quite a bit, and it really doesn't look too bad even when it cascades all the way down here. I mean, you know, you ideally maybe wouldn't want climates to come up underneath the picture like that. There are other more sophisticated ways that you can avoid some of those things, but you know, for right now, this actually works pretty well. And so I think that, you know, you can make yourself done with this. You can go ahead and submit your pin, like this would be your pin. You would copy this URL up here for you, not mine, not the one that you're looking at right now, but whatever your pin is that's got your name, your username in it. Right, you would copy your URL pin and go ahead and turn it in Canvas for this assignment. And that's that. Let me know if you have any questions.